Welcome back to my internet review show. I'm the irate gamer, but if he had a cold and waited 7 days to record these lines and then the cold wouldn't go away, so he just said fuck it and we'll record it anyway, fuck it, we'll do it. There's more differences than that though for me and the irate gamer. See, unlike the irate gamer, I'm not longing for the days when games were like Fightbox on the PS2. Rather, I'm longing for the days when I could like weep in public. I tried recently but only got overall negative reception. It's disappointing. I'm not gonna say games were better back when I was younger because like they weren't, they were mostly shit, but I want to go back to a time when I had no idea what was going on around me and it was just chaos. I remember I got my PS2 with LEGO Star Wars and it didn't have a memory card, so rather than leave the game on, I turned it off every time and played the same levels over and over, like never getting very far and having the rest of the game just remain this mystery. If I did this now though, I'd just get kind of annoyed at myself. So I decided to go back and play it again, and I did find new things, like I found out that helmets only stay on for one hit. Don't they, Jamie? You fucking... But for the most part, I remembered everything. I saw almost everything in the game once I eventually got a memory card. From the way I'm saying this, they must have been rare back in like, the 1800s or whenever I'm from. So in desperation, I decided to play the GBA LEGO Star Wars games, of which I only know the first one a little bit, so let's start the game. Remember, once you see LEGO Star Wars, there's no going back. LEGO Star Wars on the Game Boy Advance is just LEGO Star Wars, but not quite right. For example, the story is obviously just the Star Wars prequels, but it's not told very well here. When you're telling a story on a GBA game, it's going to be a bit simplified because of the limitations of the console. The story would be mostly told through text and dialogue boxes. You can't use voice acting or complicated animations or anything like that. Most games can deal with this okay, but the problem with LEGO Star Wars in particular is that they were already simplifying a story. Cutscenes in most of those games play out in mime using props and creative animations to tell the story instead, both of which you can't really have on Game Boy. But at the same time, just adding dialogue isn't really a good solution, since the mime-styled cutscenes were a huge part of why a lot of people, including myself, liked the home console version. So the game kind of panics and just does stuff, none of it really working given the lack of focus. When you transition from the first to second level, it doesn't do anything, you're just dropped in Naboo, and so I assumed that was how the game would be, you just go from level to level with no story, and that was fine, but there are cutscenes. Between some levels they have cutscenes, or more slideshows, and single frames will appear to tell you nothing. Occasionally these kind of make sense, but there's not enough information given in them for it to be like informative, and they're never clever or funny, it's just kinda... The other thing they try, which I think could have been better if given more focus, is the emojis. Sometimes to tell you what's going on, the characters will show symbols above their heads, and this actually works well for giving a general idea of what's happening. Like, it can't say much, but it says enough, and sometimes it's used especially well. Like during Order 66, it describes it pretty well, saying, "Lego Yoda must be executed," and that's pretty much what Order 66 is. And even then, I don't really disagree with the message, honestly. I still feel like these could have been used a bit better though. There's a lot that just say things like, "Aha, I am Jar Jar Binks," and that can feel a little charmless despite how charming Jar Jar Binks is. With a bit more time spent on them though, I think they could have been a bit more interesting, and with that extra focus, the game could have been given a bit more personality. I do like the graphics though, mostly. You know how people say PS1 games have the best 2D graphics, since it was like the last time they were used in the mainstream? Well, the Game Boy Advance was after, and so games on this system look fantastic generally, with LEGO Star Wars being no exception. I don't know how they did it, it might be 3D renders turned into 2D sprites, but whatever they did, it looks incredibly detailed. They look like actual LEGO figures, but all pixely and crisp, and I really like it. The animations are pretty detailed too. I think they're taken from the home console version, but they were translated really well, mostly. There are a couple problems with the presentation. For one, it feels slow, it doesn't lag. I just think that the animations are too complicated. I think that the game runs at a certain frame rate lower than that of the home console version, so when they've taken the same animations they've not removed any frames, so it literally moves slower. I'm probably talking complete shit though. It could be something completely unrelated, but that's the best I could come up with as to why the game just feels off, but the point is, yeah, it feels off. The other thing is that the models are just, like, wrong. Since the game is spanning over several films, the home console version had different versions of characters to match the film's different designs. But the Game Boy version just doesn't do this. So in episode 1, Renton has short brown hair, and then by episode 3 he has ginger hair and a beard. But in the Game Boy version, he just stays with short brown hair through the whole game. It's the same with Anakin, whose hair doesn't get longer or change colour. They both have that wee braided bit of hair as well, which, like, doesn't that mean they're Padawans? So, like, at the end of episode 3, it's just two Padawans fighting, one of which has been a Padawan for, like, a good chunk of their life now. This appears in cutscenes as well. I thought these were just images from the home console cutscenes, but apparently not, because the models are wrong here. In fact, they're wrong everywhere apart from the picture showing the episodes, where Renton ends up with his episode 2 design for episode 2, and then just keeps it for episode 3. It doesn't really matter, it's just strange. Surely they had the models already from the home console version, so why not use them? On top of that, why weren't they consistent? Why did they change the models for the menu but then not? Like, it doesn't... Again, this doesn't matter. I'm not saying like, oh, I noticed you got the Lego Star Wars models wrong, I'm putting on my angry reviewer outfit. Like, I'm not complaining, I don't really give a shit, I'm just pointing it out because, like, the rest of the game is so fucking boring. It plays kind of like the actual Lego Star Wars, but it's a bit different and very stripped down. There's no hub, you're just thrown straight into levels, and these levels have you fighting enemies and completing puzzles. The puzzles in the home console version aren't exactly deep either, but they have a focus on building, using different objects in the environment, and using characters' different abilities, which, for the most part, the Game Boy version can't do. It does from time to time use character abilities. There's parts where you need Jar Jar's high jump or R2-D2's hover, but these are generally the only character abilities that are used for puzzles, and the rest of the time it's not a puzzle, it's just standing on a button. Being a Game Boy game, they were limited on the objects they could have in the game, so you see these same buttons come up multiple times, and the puzzle ends up just being to stand on them. It's just not, like, interesting. The game does use exploration puzzles more often, telling you to find an object you have to build, or free clones, or something similar while fighting enemies, and that would be fine, but again, due to the limitations of the Game Boy, a lot of areas look really samey. Like, there's this bit on Kashyyyk where the level is just these towers repeated over and over. Not only is it really confusing, it's very dull, and it isn't helped by the combat where you just kind of spam attacks. You have force powers, and it seems like every character has a unique power, which is nice, but I found the best strategy was to just slowly walk towards enemies while swinging a lightsaber. All of their attacks would just bounce off the weapon as the Lego man crawls closer. The combat's a little better on boss fights, as you have to occasionally withdraw yourself, but it's still mostly mindless spamming. And for regular enemies, there's often a ridiculous spawn rate. They're relentless. But for the most part, the gameplay's just... it's not terrible, but it's not very likeable either. The things I liked about it were the things it changed. You don't respawn after you die, you go back to a checkpoint. These checkpoints can be kind of far apart, but that's okay because there's also merchants that sell you extra lives and can fill your health for studs. That's different. The levels are weird. They removed vehicle levels, so there's completely different levels to replace them. Like, instead of the bounty hunter chase on episode 2, you play the bit where Anakin finds his mum dying and then slaughters a village of Tusken Raiders. There's probably a reason they didn't put this in the home console version. Oh, the structure of episode 2 in general is really weird. There's only 3 levels, the one I mentioned on Tatooine and 2 on Geonosis. One of the Geonosis levels is Renton going there, and the other is the rest of the movie. Like, they just fit the entire rest of the film in this one really long level. It's kinda weird. And mini-kits are holograms of the Death Star. That's about it. This game isn't very good. I don't recommend it. It's not awful, but the only thing I got out of it was seeing the weird differences between it and its home console version. And I just mentioned the fun differences. I wouldn't bother with it, even if you really like the home console version and desperately need a portable LEGO Star Wars, so that everyone knows you play LEGO Star Wars as your lightsaber noises fill your subway carriage. With this all in mind, I kind of really didn't want to play LEGO Star Wars 2 on Game Boy, thinking it would be the same thing, but while I was kinda right, everything has been improved to the point where this ends up being more like a straight up demake of the actual game. Remember how I said the story should focus more on those quick in-game story bits and remove the cutscenes? That's exactly what they do, and it's great. Look at the I am your father bit, for example. It's really simple, but it's got the same charm that makes the LEGO cutscenes so appealing usually. The graphics don't seem like they're just elements of the home console version turned into sprites. Rather, I think they were specifically made for this version, and while I don't find them as visually appealing since I like the whole 3D models as 2D sprites thing, these work much better in-game. There's no slow feeling to movement. And the gameplay is LEGO Star Wars. Like the other Game Boy game, it's got more of a focus on exploration, but here the places feel like places, so it works really well. This is LEGO Star Wars 2 on a Game Boy. It's probably the best game ever made. The problem with that though is that I don't know what to say. Since you wanted LEGO Star Wars 2 on a Game Boy, here you go. I don't have much to complain about. It's a bit short, about 2 hours long, but that's it. And otherwise it's what I just talked about, but better. There's not even any weird differences I can talk about, like the levels being different. The level on Dagobah is missing, but apart from that it's pretty much the same I think, since vehicle levels are here. So I guess that's LEGO Star Wars on Game Boy Advanced. My curiosity has been fueled, so I guess it's time for me to transcend and use my new knowledge of LEGO Star Wars. I'll see you in a future lifetime.
I don't think I'll ever live to see a prophet. I don't want to be a locket clinging to a chest till the last breath.